Welcome to Airway Exchange, the podcast for empowering educators and inspiring future CRNAs, a new series of Beyond the Mask supported by AA&A.
We're your host team. I'm Greg Collins.
I'm Nikki D'Amico.
I'm Erin Martin.
And I'm Louisa Martin. We're here to support the community of CRNA educators with conversations to explore, learn, and grow.
To pursue excellence in the evolving field of nurse anesthesia education.
And to champion our students and enrich the future of the profession.
This is Airway Exchange.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to Airway Exchange, the AA&A podcast for nurse anesthesia educators. This is Erin. I'm here with my co-hosts, all four of us tonight, Louisa Dasher-Martin, Nikki D'Amico, and Greg Collins. We are very excited. This is our first taping of 2026. Episode 9 we are on already, which is surprising to all of us. This has been a very fun endeavor for us, and we're excited to be getting into double digits of recording the next time. As we get things started for the new year, we've been thinking about getting things in order, and with that comes the topic of accreditation, which will face every nurse anesthesia program at some point. Some of us are in it, some of us are looking forward to it, and some maybe are just recovering. But we don't have a guest tonight. It's just the four hosts. We have a couple of us hosts who are program directors, other are faculty. And so we just wanted to spend some time for this episode talking about our own experiences with accreditation as educators, also as a student. Louisa has experience of having gone through an accreditation review as a student. So Greg's I'm going to kick it back to Greg, who will be our official host for tonight, and let him take it from here.
Thank you so much, Erin. I'm only hosting, if you will, or interviewing, because I'm the only one in our pre-show discussions that I learned that has not been through the accreditation process. Our program is due early 2026, and so I'm hoping to learn a lot from you guys tonight. So why don't we just start by kind of talking about some previous experiences? Nikki, why don't you get us started with that?
Sure. Sounds great. I'm chuckling to myself here as you said that. I'm like, oh, lucky you. It's not all bad, but yeah, it's a unique experience. So I first experienced accreditation. I joined the faculty at VCU in 2010, and they went through the accreditation right before I came here full time. So I was a clinical site coordinator, and we were one of the sites that they picked to come to. So I went through it from that perspective. And I honestly would tell you that was nerve-wracking. I was so worried that we were not doing something that we were supposed to. I had no idea what the standards were, what the accreditation visit would look like. So I was, I think, excessively nervous as a clinical site coordinator going through that part of it. So we got a 10-year accreditation in 2010. Our next one landed in 2020. So, of course, the self-study and such was done prior to that. And then our on-site review had to be virtual because of the restrictions related to the pandemic. I came into the role of program director in 2021, and it was right around that time that they re-implemented the on-site in-person visits. And having been one of those programs that went through that during the pandemic, there was another part to it. So you weren't really fully done with that 2020 process until you completed the in-person visit. I actually found it to be not as intimidating as it had been prior. It was very well organized. It was a limited visit. For sure, it was not the same as a full all out. I mean, it was very, very rigidly structured, so forth, to a surprising degree, such an extensive amount of coordination. But overall, I thought a really positive experience. My self-study writing experience largely came when we went from the master's degree level to the doctoral level. That was 2016 when we submitted the self-study, and I had a significant part of writing some of those documents. So I've had a taste of each of those things, and now we are just past the halfway point. So I'm starting to work on what do we need to do to get ready for the next one. So I've kind of seen a number of parts of the accreditation process. I guess we'll turn it over to Louisa. You want to share your experience?
I don't have nearly as much experience as you do, but as a student I started at Northeastern in Boston in 2012 and graduated in 2015, and I think the visit was in 2013, somewhere in there. But I can just remember being afraid of saying the wrong thing, but I specifically remember them taking all 3 cohorts, meeting with us just away from faculty, away from staff, away from anyone affiliated, with leadership or what we perceived as power or control over us, and asked us a series of questions. And the students, I was I believe it was my first year, so 2012, 2013, somewhere in there. The second and third years were much more vocal than the students in our cohort. Sometimes the students maybe get more comfortable, they get more vocal, but they really wanted to know what was working, what could be improved. And for the most part, there was a number of students in there. So as far as getting individualized opportunities to speak, I don't even remember if I said anything, but, throughout my time as a student nurse anesthetist or a resident nurse anesthetist, I was pretty terrified of, I wanted to be a nurse anesthetist so bad. I was always terrified of messing up in didactic, messing up in the OR. So I was afraid of saying the wrong thing. So I just kind of kept quiet and observed. And I know now that as an educator, not all students have that quiet fear. Some are more vocal than others. Anyway, as an educator, I started full-time in 2022, and we went through accreditation in 2023. And as I was telling you guys when we were talking before we started recording, I didn't even know what a self-study was. Our program director was very much consumed with finishing the self-study. And in 2022, leading up to our March visit in 2023. And so again, I didn't know what that was. And as I've said to you guys before, academia is a whole other language. And as we were talking about before we started, we answer to a number of different standards and accrediting bodies. So that it was a little intimidating. And I would say as an educator, when they came for the on-site visit, again, I was kind of afraid to say the wrong thing. So I just kind of tried to keep quiet and learn. One interesting thing, I went to one of the clinical sites that they chose to visit was the clinical site where I practice. So that was really interesting to go and watch the on-site reviewer interact with the student, in pre-op, in the operating room, and then in PACU. And the student was really nervous. I felt for the student. They were so afraid of, missing the intubation, that kind of thing. But ultimately, it was a stressful experience for me as a new person, but I don't think it was my stress wasn't the same as my program director's stress. But it was all in all a good visit.
Erin, what about yours?
So my program is actually set to go through a review in April as well of 2026. Now that the calendar has turned, it feels very imminent. I used to be able to say next year, but I first experienced an accreditation review in 2013 when I was a faculty member of the program that I'm currently directing. And it was fascinating to be a part of that process as kind of one of the worker bees who was kind of, assembling and helping and kind of taking the direction from our program director, who did a wonderful job of keeping us organized. We were scheduled for a visit in 2023. We were deferred a year because of the pandemic. So we got a 1-year reprieve. I was going to say stay of execution, but I'll say reprieve. We got a 1-year deferment. So we actually underwent a visit in 2024, worked very, very hard, put everything together, had a great on-site review, and we were surprised to be awarded a 2-year accreditation decision. That was humbling. We've learned a lot, I think, in our program. People have said, my gosh, a 2-year decision, what happened? We had some curricular things that we needed to change around. We were understaffed, I think, which most programs probably would feel that they are. So those were a couple of the things that we were cited for. What to do with the 2-year accreditation decision is a tough thing to reconcile. You sit with it for a little bit, and then recognize that accreditation is a measure of compliance with standards, not a measure of quality. And that is something that a mentor of mine told me when we had that decision. This does not reflect the quality of your program. It reflects your program's compliance with some standards. And so that was a really important thing for me to learn and be able to use as a framing tool for this. So it actually prompted us to do revision of our curriculum, which in hindsight was really necessary. It prompted our institution to recognize that we needed more faculty. And so we were actually approved to get an additional 0.8 faculty, which was 2.4 positions, which has been incredible for us. We were a little bit lacking in our regional anesthesia opportunities. And so it prompted some different ways of thinking about that within our institution. So I would say to anyone who gets a decision that maybe they weren't expecting, that there are silver linings to that. even though you have to dig a little bit when you first get that phone call. And it also, I will tell you, doing it again 2 years later, it's easier because a lot of it's already done. You already have a map. So anyway, I am living in my third round of accreditation, and it does get a little easier, but it's work. No matter how many times you do it, it's a lot of work.
I think your statement about accreditation being more of a reflection of compliance with standards, that may be the soundbite of the podcast. I think that that's a beautiful way to frame it, and obviously from the voice of experience. So I appreciate you doing that. So I'll throw the question out. Other than the giant elephant in the room, which is the self-study that's involved with reaccreditation or initial accreditation, give me some ideas about what are the major challenges that a program faces when they're due.
I think being organized and making a timeline is really important. So, in our experience, I would say it's kind of like a home improvement project. It's going to take twice as long and twice as much money as you thought. So, start earlier than you think you need to start. That would be my advice. And I do need to offer a little bit of a disclaimer here. I am speaking tonight on behalf of my experience as a program director. I do serve as an on site reviewer. I've only done one visit. It was years ago. And just because of us prepping for these numerous self-studies and visits, I have not had the availability to serve as an on-site reviewer for quite a while. But I do still hold that title. But what I'm talking about tonight is just my own experience and having lived this. So I would say start earlier than you think you need to. Think about every single stakeholder you have. So down to the administrative assistant of your dean, that is a stakeholder. That is the person who's going to get the dean to the meeting that they have to be at. So think about all of the buckets. You're going to want to make sure you have lunch for your on-site reviewers. That seems like a silly thing, but all of those details really matter. As far as preparing your self-study, I know an on-site visit workshop that I went to, they said there's really a couple ways you can do the self-study. The program director can just do it themselves, or you can divide it up into different chunks, but you want to make sure you have a cohesive voice. So if you are going to have different members of your faculty do different standards, you will need to eventually kind of make that cohesive, like writing a manuscript, right? You want it to all kind of sound like it's coming from the same voice. So I would say having a good organizational plan is probably the best thing you can do. We have utilized, I have no stock in Microsoft. If I did, I would not be working. But we use Microsoft, the Microsoft platform. And so we have like a SharePoint site where we have everything organized and, the to-dos, the in progress, the things that are done. Leverage your systems that you have in your institution. If you have a project manager available to you, that would be a great thing to tap into. So I just think recognizing that this is one of the biggest projects you will ever do in your career, and use your teams and use the systems that are available to you. I think that will help you be organized in tackling the beast.
You mentioned outside other faculty member help versus program director or APD. Which side of that do you fall on? Do you think the more people involved, the better to kind of spread out the work? Or do you think that single voice and that single perspective is more important?
So I wrote the self-study in 2024. I'm writing it again in 2026. But we had a full faculty workday on Saturday this year. So we divided everything up. So this person, you're in charge of getting all of the facilities information that we need about our library resources and student services and where do our students park and all of those kinds of things. So we divided it into buckets. We just kept calling them our buckets. So we have the syllabus bucket, clinical and didactic syllabi. We have the facilities bucket. We have technology. You explain all the technology we have in our program. You are the equipment person. You talk about all the models we have. What our ultrasound machines look like? How do we deliver this? That has been, and so our faculty have been incredibly involved in this. While I was kind of the director of that, having a faculty who are invested and willing to help and recognizing that this is our project is really, really important. So I've been fortunate that we've had a great team who are willing to come in on a Saturday in exchange for a Chipotle lunch. And to dig in and get this done. That's how we've approached it. Nikki, how about you guys?
We really did the same approach as far as there was one person really at the end of the day that they did the final edits, and the voice through that self-study was one person's, but then it was a shared Google Drive. We're on the Google Apps platform. So we did the same thing, but having others add to that was key. And even writing pieces of it, I would write the systematic evaluation plan, and then the narrative to go with that was by the person writing it, the program director at the time. So I think that it takes an extraordinary amount of coordination and that project management piece to do it that way. But I've also gone through accreditation of a new program that we've started up in my department, not a nurse anesthesia program, and largely needed to write and do most of that myself. And I would say that is crushing. I mean, just overwhelming in the volume of work that you need to do, and not a better way to do it. In advance of, again, I mentioned we're at our halfway point. We're, as of 2026, officially very much past the halfway point. I've been working through annually making sure that each of the parts of the self study are up to date. So I think, starting with that baseline of what was we were accredited under this prior self study, but keeping that self study kind of as a living document and going through, that's my approach to doing it the next time. And I am using others to add to that, but I'm just, keeping track of things. If any aspect of our program operations has changed, say, platform that we use for evaluations changes, when that changes, I'm kind of going in and changing the language to be sure that it's current and up to date with that, and kind of revisiting things like the systematic evaluation plan and stuff. I'm hoping that that will preemptively make doing the self-study in 2029 a lot easier. And again, I can, without the time crunch, be able to have it pretty much done by the time we're ready to officially write the narrative. But there's so much to do. I can imagine that if you are in a situation where you have to do that in a 3-month or 6-month period and teach and continue to run the program and continue to, write papers and such, it's undoable.
That is a great point. I would also, so using that as a living document is really, really important. The other thing that I would advocate for is the COA has a lot of tools on their website. They have like the templates. So one I'm thinking of in particular is this faculty resources matrix. So it's a great table where we used, and it really demonstrates faculty workload. Anytime you get a new faculty person, update that. Use that in real time. And that way, when it comes time for your visit, you've got it. It's all there. There is also a crosswalk, a curriculum crosswalking document that is a beast to create initially, but keeping that updated as you change a course or you tweak this, that is a great way to kind of keep yourself at the ready. Those are two of the COA template documents that I can think of that are useful just in managing that kind of information, even outside of the world of accreditation.
That's great. I think kind of what both of you guys have mentioned is treating the process as not a every 2-year, every 10-year process, but as a daily, if not monthly, if not quarterly, if not yearly type process. I think that really cuts down on the work that's involved when that date, that imminent date, gets a little bit closer.
And making it a team sport. I mean, it definitely is. There's no question. And one of the other things that I did when we were, writing components of that is to reach out to other program directors. I've found people to be extremely willing and just so generous with sharing ideas about how they handled a certain section and how they managed a particular section of the self-study. So I can't stress enough. And I've had people reach out to me. I share freely. I think it's just one of the great things about having connections with other educators is, trying to figure out if there's a sticky point, how did you remove that friction for your program, and what did that look like? And then you learn, some new ideas about how they do things that are really helpful as well. So I would highly recommend that as well, as in terms of a major strategy to help you get through it.
And if you haven't been through it before, you're assigned an accreditation specialist from the COA. And that person is there for a reason. I mean, if you have the questions, you better to ask the question than to make an assumption. And so I would advise that the accreditation specialist will hate me probably, but use those folks, ask the question, send the email. They're knowledgeable. And I think, getting a good self-study behooves them in the end as well. So I think they're happy to answer the questions so that they have a good study to look at.
Those are great resources. I love the networking piece. I think that that's a huge piece, and also a reason why we cherish the time as educators that we get to spend together. I think that that's huge to make connections and form relationships that we know will help us and benefit our programs as we go along. Kind of getting a little more specific now. Let's talk about maybe some of the difficult standards that there are to meet, some of the current standards, and we'll speak briefly maybe as we go on about the revised standards. But what are the standards that you guys feel like are more important or maybe more difficult to either prove in self study or to actually accomplish?
I think, some of the difficult things to stay compliant with, I think for a lot of programs are collectively, as we increase program size, we have more and more students in each of our cohorts, and there are just skills, that have very specific required numbers, things like central lines that we know we're all, when we go to meetings, we're all talking about how everybody is struggling to get access for our trainees for central lines because there's just so many fewer of those being done in clinical practice. They're not being used as much. And I've talked to actually recently had a family practice resident who came and spent some time with me and they're struggling. I mean, I think it's, ubiquitous. Everyone who still has it in their scope of practice to do central lines seems to be struggling with that. And certainly we have unique challenges for things like regional anesthesia. As again, you grow your program numbers. That's really the rate limiting step for our program for sure. For a lot of programs, the number of students you can take in each cohort is not unlimited because we not only want to meet the minimums. I don't know of any program directors who are want to be in the game and say, yeah, we're a low bar program. We want to, we want to barely meet it and spread it out so everybody gets just one more than they need or exactly what they need. We want to double, we want to triple. I mean, I think, for most of those things, skills, particularly regional anesthesia, for those of us who are passionate about that, I certainly would love to see our trainees get 3 to 4 times what they're getting. There's just never enough of those to go around. So it is difficult. I mean, I think it comes down to, having a really multifaceted strategy to make sure it's constant monitoring, those case numbers and looking at how they're doing. It changes every year. Things beyond our control change at a given clinical site where the place that was the go-to spot for central lines, suddenly something changes and they're not getting any of those anymore. And you don't know if it's going to be a long lasting change or not. So I think that really, staying compliant with that standard, some of the case number standards, the specialty cases under 2 years old, pediatrics, cardiac, these I think are the day-to-day really challenging things that put the COA standards right in your face every day. And you're constantly making changes in your clinical schedule and program operations to accommodate that. That's the first thing that comes to mind.
Well, and that's interesting too, because that's something that's changing in practice. Like central lines is something, there are fewer and fewer central lines. And so I think that it's important for us as educators to be the voice of clinical practice to the COA. And, when revisions are requested, that we keep our input going towards the COA of look, not only are we having difficulty finding these, so is everyone else in the country, because they're just not as prevalent as they used to be, because clinical practice is changing. And that's kind of an onus on us as educators to make sure that we stay in the ear of the COA and let them know exactly what's going on in clinical practice. Aaron, what do you think? What are big challenges with standards?
Yeah, so everything you said, Nikki, absolutely. I think for us, regional anesthesia, epidural numbers in particular, has been challenging. And one of the main drivers for us that's made that challenging is the changing landscape of OB practice in rural sites. So some of our biggest epidural sites were these small rural hospitals in Minnesota and Wisconsin. And so many of those practices aren't doing OB anymore. And so they're moving to the regional medical center. And those may be places where the CRNAs aren't doing the epidurals. And so that has been the biggest challenge for us. So I think, to your point, Greg, we need to stay in the ear of the COA, but we also need to continue to advocate for rural practice for CRNAs, because we just can't get the numbers. And, we stay in close communication, our program does, with other programs in our region. Do you have students here? Do you have students here? And that's a challenge as educators too, because we want to make sure that we're respecting our colleagues and respecting other programs while also filling the needs that we have in our own programs. And so learning to work well in the sandbox with other programs and making sure that we can all get those numbers sharing sites maybe that we haven't had to do before. We're having to be a little bit more creative with, okay, what if we do 3 rotations a year and you do 3 rotations a year? How can we make that work? I think being able to communicate and collaborate with other programs is going to be key as we lose more of these rural sites. Louisa, are you running into this stuff?
We're really fortunate, and there are only 2 CRNA programs in Georgia. One is private. We're the only public nursing anesthesia program in a public institution. And we are really fortunate to not only have a number of clinical sites all over the state of Georgia, but we also send students to Tennessee and Florida, Jacksonville, Florida. And we have phenomenal regional numbers, really phenomenal. And the CRNAs who hire our graduates compliment the new graduates on being able to teach them regional techniques. So that is something that we're really proud of. And I credit Dr. Reed Halterman on that. He's our clinical site guru, all things clinical. But that's not to say we don't face challenges with clinical sites. But we run into the issue for sure with central lines every year. I feel like we have a couple students who have to come and simulate a couple with us in the lab. And I agree with Greg. I believe this was discussed at ADCE, what is now going to be EDGE, but ADCE last year in one of the sessions. Maybe it came up that I thought the required number had decreased, but it's still a high number for the reality of the number of central lines that unless you're in a cardiac OR doing hearts and it's a great site where the CRNAs are the ones putting the lines in, it's a difficult thing. If we have a patient with a central line, usually they're coming to the OR with the central line already in place. So it's not something that is easy for us to get for our students or as a clinician. Like I haven't put a central line in years, probably since school. So that's something that's difficult for us. But I feel really fortunate and proud of our exposure to regional anesthesia in the state of Georgia. So I'm proud of that.
What about point of care ultrasound? That's a relatively recently updated standard. How are you guys kind of getting around that in terms of how you're counting exams or where you're getting the exams, or where's the push coming from there?
I'd love to speak to a point that kind of relates to what Louisa just said, which is that I think what we're teaching our residents about POCUS is something they're going out and sharing and disseminating to the people that they work with. So it's kind of working in the other direction. I think we've seen some of our sites start to do gastric ultrasound more routinely because, the trainees coming to them have experience and can talk about it and say, this is really, something that is very much within our scope. We can do this. This is a nice, easy to learn skill. And so I think we're seeing some of that where there's dissemination of knowledge to the clinical sites and seeing some change in practice. And then the next group of residents that comes through is able to then get some exposure to doing that in that practice site. They change their practice standard for that site. So I think we've seen some really great developments in that area. I definitely think in a lot of the different POCUS areas of practice. I mean, gastric ultrasound, I think, is one where things have changed a little more quickly because of the GLP-1s with this new drug that is so widely utilized now. I think that really kind of pushed that forward. It's a little slower in other sites. Neuraxial procedure, using ultrasound for neuraxial scanning has not really taken off. And then some of the other POCUS exams, focused cardiac exams, fluid assessment, these are things that really, they're just not seeing in practice. They're learning them, we're getting them exposure, but it's simulated in many instances because not many of the sites that we go to are doing that routinely.
Yeah, that's kind of the inertia of previous practice in our clinical sites, I think, is carrying on to that. One of the things that we've done, particularly with gastric ultrasound, any clinical site where we've had a little bit of consternation about our students doing gastric ultrasound scanning, we've offered to come out as faculty and go to the clinical site and perform just an on-site little workshop, if you will. And then once we do that, that really clicks. One of our 25 graduates at a major academic hospital in the DFW area, when he graduated, he was called the gastric ultrasound guru, and they would go find, the physicians were going and finding him, and we need to go find Manny to come do our gastric ultrasound, and they insisted that he come to work there, which he is, by the way, but because if not, they may not have anyone there to do that gastric ultrasound scanning. So I think developing a relationship with the clinical side and something new like that, going and showing them what we're teaching the resident first didactically before they arrive at the clinical site, giving them that same experience, at least the practical experience of it, I think really has made a difference, and it's increased those numbers significantly for those clinical sites that we've gone and done that for.
They also
What
make,
about
just one more little plug, it also makes for great student projects. So
Yeah.
we have done a couple of those where we actually have one going on now where we're developing an internal certification for our CRNAs to be certified for POCUS. Again, just an internal certification, but it's a student project. So there's so many things that we can do, and we can utilize kind of those things that we're being pushed to do from the COA standards to advance our practice and get those things into play that maybe we wouldn't have been forced, for lack of a better word, to do before.
That's cool. And, I think part of the difficulty, and here I am speaking as the one who hasn't been through an on-site accreditation yet. I'm speaking like the expert, but I think one of the difficulties with regional anesthesia and with point of care is that there are no curricular standards for that. Like, we don't have any curricular standards for that. I know I'm working with the ANA Foundation with a group of faculty members working to develop those. And so hopefully within a year to 18 months, we'll have those. That will give us a little more data on which to base these decisions in terms of numbers, in terms of how we teach it. That gives us some curricular standards that will hopefully carry on and help us meet these accrediting standards.
Another challenge that I'm finding with thinking about curriculum versus necessarily just procedures with the new standards is kind of the move towards having things be very non-anesthesia specific. I don't know if you guys are running into that or what your thoughts are, but part of the curriculum change that we made in response to our last visit was things like a general pathophysiology course versus having pathophysiology integrated into a more systems-based approach is what we'd had previously. That's challenging. And it's especially challenging when students are continually saying, how does this relate to anesthesia? And so that's something that we're finding to be a challenge where we're offering you a general patho course and they're saying, yeah, but what does this mean for anesthesia? And we're kind of bound by standards of saying, well, it's supposed to be general. That's been tough for us. How are you guys navigating that in your programs?
Are you in a College of Nursing or in allied health? Are you a DNAP or
Allied health.
DNP?
Allied
Okay,
health.
same.
Mhm.
And I wonder if that is more of an issue for those of us in DNAP programs than it is in those who are in DNP programs, because I believe that, the standards are now shifting towards more compliant with AACN standards. So I think if you're already in a DNP program, that particular standard change may not be impacting you. It's impacting us, but in a different way, because we had the pathophysiology course was more general, but it didn't cover the lifespan. We had put pediatrics in a bucket, and that's where they got the peds, phys, pathophys, et cetera. So it's impacting us in a different way because our pathophysiology class needs to now cover the lifespan versus just covering adults.
Right.
So we just had our curriculum organized differently. So I think it may be unique to the DNAP programs is my
Fair.
guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Probably very true.
That's interesting because that sometimes is a matter of minutia and nomenclature on how those things are woven together. And gosh, we could do a whole nother podcast on AACN standards. I think that's that's a little bit of a sticky subject most of the time, and how those have evolved over the last 10 years for sure. Let's kind of wrap up by looking at I know we've recently been through revision in COA standards. What are the potential impacts to you guys' programs in terms of the new things that the COA is looking at?
I think we've kind of hit on both of those to the extent that it's the change in numbers and then some of the curricular shifts that we've really looked at. Those are the major ways that the new standards have impacted us. And, again, I think anytime there's a change, we're already looking at case numbers, aggressively. I think we're even more so kind of on edge, just making sure. And then it gets a little bit challenging because, the standards are released and then there's a little bit of a lag time. So, you're not looking at everybody that's already matriculated has to meet those today. So you're, kind of rolling them out that way. But again, I think we're always aiming to exceed the case numbers that we have to have. So it amps it up a little bit, but I think largely, it's something we're really already pivoting a lot on. Again, the other curricular standards, I think It was difficult to know whether they were going to be implemented as what we were seeing last year at ADCE, and then whether the comment period would change much. It really didn't. They kind of stayed largely, it seemed to me, much like what we saw at the last meeting. And, I think we were really easily able to start to, make some shifts. I think it's a good opportunity, as you said, Aaron. I think one way to reframe accreditation always is to keep looking at it as a way to improve. So I think when there's a new standard coming out, it gives us an opportunity to look at what we're doing now and saying, okay, great. Are we compliant with this? Whether you are or you aren't, you're doing the looking and you're evaluating where you are, looking at your curriculum again. Have we updated our map? Have
Mhm.
we, kind of done that annual review and making sure that, we're tight, and then, can we plan ahead for some changes that we can make that will help us better, comply with the new standards. So I think it's a good opportunity. I think the revision isn't going to have a huge impact, but it's enough to make us pause and take a moment to look. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, and it can push us toward things. A lot of our clinical experiences are done in a pretty heavily medically directed practice. And so independent induction has been something that our students haven't always gotten a lot of opportunity for. And now needing to have a higher number of those things has pushed us to have to kind of push back a little bit. And it's been great, actually. So I think, it does force us sometimes to move in directions that maybe we wouldn't have without the push. And that's not always a bad thing. It can feel painful at the time, but it does offer, I think, growth opportunities for the most part. That's been a good thing for us.
It's a great leverage piece when you go to a new clinical site
Yep.
too. We have clinical sites reach out to us requesting that we have students and residents placed there. And, we go in with our standards and just say, is the resident in your facility going to be able to do central lines? Are they going to be able to do independent inductions? And if the answer is no, then that's going to be the answer from us. And so I think that gives us a good chip in which to put on the table to leverage those things out. And we've actually developed some really profound, great experiences in new clinical sites where we've gone in and had those discussions up front.
I think that's one of the best positive side effects of, being an accredited program. You do have that very, regimented accreditation standard as support. I mean, you mentioned it with respect to going to your institution to get more faculty and to say this is what we have to have. I mean, they're incredibly persuasive to the stakeholders that we're trying to persuade that we need more opportunities for clinical cases or more faculty. And when it is written by the Council on Accreditation, they listen. They don't listen when they tell you, listen, we're strapped. We can't make this work with the number of faculty we have. But when you say we're not complying with standards, whoop, okay,
Yep.
magically the money's there, or okay, we'll help you get those cases. So I think it's one of the good things, as much as we talk about the stressful parts of staying compliant with the standards. There are also positive side effects of that, I guess. We get some of the benefit as well.
I will say quickly to kind of end things here, I have an enormous amount of respect for program administrators because of this, if for no other reason, because of this role that they play in reaccreditation. As we're gearing up for an upcoming visit, I've really gained an enormous amount of really humble adoration for our program director and for our associate program director, because the work that they put into this. Now, obviously, it's a team sport and we're all participating, but knowing that there's ultimate responsibility that lies in their lap as a faculty member, knowing that they're going to take care of that really allows me to do what I do every day and to get in the classroom and to get in the clinical site and do the things that I enjoy and appreciate doing. So a shout out to the program directors we have here on the podcast, but to everyone who's listening to the role you play in this is significant. And so thank you.
Chocolate always helps, right, Nikki?
Absolutely.
So what are some closing thoughts that you guys have, maybe on a program that if somebody's listening that is due for reaccreditation, or maybe if they're in the middle like you guys are, Nikki, what are some closing thoughts that you have?
I think my closing thoughts would be to, really leverage all of the resources that you have, and definitely that idea that others are out there that are going through it. Somebody in the United States who's running a program has seen that same challenge, I promise you. And I have not had a person that I've reached out to for assistance turned me down, and I've not turned anyone down who's reached out to me. So I think that would be my biggest piece of advice is to, use those meeting times when we're together to talk with other folks. It's kind of a boring conversation. Let's pull out the standards and look at our self-study and see where we are. But it really is helpful. And, you feel like you're asking stupid questions, but they're not. Everybody has the same ones. So
Yeah,
I'm just trying to soak up all y'all's experience. And, I've kind of made a to-do list in my, to add to my to-do list for next week is a new assistant program director. We have 2 APDs, but this is probably where I feel the least knowledgeable and the weakest. So I appreciate y'all's insight. And like I said, I've added some things to my to-do list. I always have questions. So now I have more questions when I go back to work.
And you have
tomorrow.
resources now too.
Yes, and I have great resources. Yes, another thing I love about this podcast.
Erin, wrap us up.
With it being on the horizon for us, I guess I would just say adopt a systematic approach and stick with it. That would be my advice. Have your binder, have whatever it takes. Use your team, but just it is a marathon, not a sprint. So don't try to cram this in at the last minute. It will not work. And just, use it as an opportunity to reflect on your program. It's like cleaning your closets. You're going to lay it all out and take a really good look at it. And we don't get the opportunity to do that very often. So at the end of it, you have a great story to tell. It really is just telling the story of your program. And that's kind of a fun story. So I think it's something to be proud of when you turn that self-study in. I'm clearly trying to talk myself into this. I'm giving myself a pep talk right now, but it feels good when it's done. And it's a worthwhile exercise, I would say. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us for episode 9 of Airway Exchange. We'll be taping again in January and going to be doing some live tapings in February at the AANA Edge meeting. So we look forward to seeing some of you there and happy to be with you in the new year.
Looking to elevate your impact as a nurse anesthesiology educator? Then join us February 4th through the 7th at the Omni Louisville Hotel for EDGE. Educate, develop, grow, engage. This in-person event offers up to 18.5 Class A credits and deep dive small group sessions on virtual reality and education, AI innovation, gamification, wellness, and more. EDGE is where passionate educators connect, collaborate, and shape the future of nurse anesthesia learning. So register now using the link in the show description, and we'll see you there.